16. Kenneth Skin. When a disabled man struggled to operate the self-checkout machine at a Target store in Albuquerque, New Mexico, while trying to buy a bicycle in August 2022, he probably expected someone to come along and help him. But instead, he was forcefully removed from the store by Officer Kenneth Skin, a 28-year-old cop who apparently was no stranger to allegations of police brutality. The shopper initially faced criminal charges in connection with the incident, but the case was ultimately dropped after a judge determined that he was incompetent. Skin was fired from his job 6 months later after his superiors concluded that he arrested the disabled man unlawfully and abused his power. He was criminally charged with false imprisonment, filing a false police report, perjury, and battery. In a separate but equally controversial incident, Skin was among a trio of Albuquerque officers who shot a drunk black man dead outside a gas station during the same month as the first incident. 27-year-old Keshawn Thomas was passed out inside his Chevy Camaro when the cops approached in response to a call requesting a welfare check on the man, who'd allegedly been sitting at a gas pump for hours. According to reports, the police ordered Thomas to exit his vehicle and spoke with him for roughly 10 minutes. Then, after determining that he was drunk and therefore in no condition to drive, the officers asked Thomas to call someone to come get his car. Thomas reportedly obtained permission to get a phone out of the Camaro. But before walking over to the car, he allegedly handed an officer a loaded magazine and declared that there was a weapon inside the trunk. The officers later claimed that they saw a gun in the car as Thomas searched around for his phone, prompting them to open fire on the young man. They shot 16 rounds total, and Thomas died from his injuries. Thomas's father later accused the police of talking trash at his son instead of de-escalating the situation, and the family filed a lawsuit against the city and police department. The outcome, however, is unclear. 15. Chester cop caught red-handed. A situation between a cop and a civilian quickly spiraled out of control during a 2019 St. Patrick's Day parade in Chester, Pennsylvania, putting a police sergeant in the spotlight for allegedly abusing his power. A viral video showed the sergeant striking a petite 20-year-old woman named Dominique DeFiore in the face with a stun gun. In the aftermath of the incident, a police spokesperson claimed that DeFiore instigated the incident by striking the sergeant first. They said that it happened before someone pulled their phone out and began recording the interaction. DeFiore was hit with criminal charges in connection with the incident, including aggravated assault and alcohol-related offenses, but many called for the case to be dropped. Dominique's grandfather, Dominic DeFiore, questioned how a man twice his granddaughter's size found it necessary to take such forceful action against the young woman. In fact, a lot of people asked the same question, and many called for the sergeant to be held accountable for what seemed like an excessive use of force. Chester Police Chief James Nolan stood by the agency's version of what happened, claiming that the situation involving DeFiore was just part of a larger event. He further explained that officers from multiple agencies were on scene at the time of the incident, and that his agency was fully cooperating with Delaware County authorities in their efforts to investigate what happened. DeFiore posted bail following the controversial encounter, and it's unclear whether the officer involved was cleared of any wrongdoing or disciplined for his handling of the situation. 14. Daniel Andrew. In a disturbing video that went viral in 2014, a 51-year-old great-grandmother named Marlene Pinnock was punched repeatedly by a California Highway Patrol officer. The incident, which occurred along the Santa Monica Freeway, was captured on camera by a passing driver. According to news reports, Pinnock was seen walking barefoot along the freeway shortly before the incident. And in the video, the officer could be seen tackling Pinnock to the ground and striking her in the face numerous times. Later identified as Daniel Andrew, The officer claimed he struck Pinnock to prevent her from running into oncoming traffic. Pinnock was taken to the hospital for a mental evaluation following the incident, and she was detained again in 2015 after she was seen wandering barefoot along the highway a second time. Andrew agreed to resign as part of a settlement to right the wrongs that were done to Pinnock, and in addition, the victim was awarded $1.5 million in damages. No criminal charges were ever brought against Andrew in the aftermath of the assault. According to the California Highway Patrol, there wasn't enough evidence to show that the former officer used excessive force during the encounter. 13. Nicholas Tartaglione. After retiring from the Briarcliff Manor Police Department in 2008 due to an injury, former cop Nicholas Tartaglione spent the next several years living on a quiet ranch in Otisville, roughly 70 miles or 113 kilometers north of New York City. And during that time, he went from a former lawman to an active criminal by starting a drug ring. Tartaglione ran his illicit enterprise with the help of an avid bodybuilder named Joseph Biggs, who worked for him as an enforcer, as well as a retired NYPD officer and bodybuilder named Gerard Benderoth, who also provided muscle to the operation. Tartaglione's enterprise began its downward spiral in 2015 when he hired a landscaper named Martin Luna to buy a shipment of cocaine in Mexico and sell it in Florida. Everything went as planned, so Tartaglione sent Luna back down to Mexico with $200,000 cash for another batch of drugs. However, Luna returned to New York empty-handed this time, claiming that the dealers he bought the cocaine from ran off without giving him the promised product. Several months later, in 2016, Tartaglione and his co-conspirators lured Luna to a bar under the guise of discussing a new job opportunity in the construction field. Luna brought along his nephews Miguel Luna and Urbano Santiago, and family friend Hector Gutierrez. The moment the men entered the bar, they were ordered at gunpoint to get down on the floor, where they were then bound with duct tape. Tartaglione tortured Luna before strangling him to death with a zip tie, while forcing one of his nephews to watch the entire time. He loaded Luna's lifeless body into his truck and drove to his property while his associates transported the 3 other captives. Santiago Gutierrez and Miguel Luna were ordered to their knees and mercilessly shot dead, and the 4 bodies were buried at the remote wooded site. While the murder of Martin Luna was planned, the other 3 men were merely considered collateral damage. They weren't involved in the drug activities, they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. 8 months after the murders, the FBI charged Tartaglione with 17 counts, including murder, kidnapping, and a handful of drug and gun charges. He famously shared a cell with disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, who accused Tartaglione of assault, which he denied. Agents pulled Benderoth over in early 2017, but he died before they could apprehend him. Biggs, on the other hand, was arrested a few months later. Facing the same charges as Tartaglione and a potential life sentence, Biggs decided to cooperate in hopes of possibly seeing freedom again at some point in his lifetime. Because Tartaglione maintained his innocence and Benderoth was dead, authorities had no choice but to go by Biggs' version of events. He promised to be truthful under the condition that he would face a definite life sentence if he was caught in a single lie. Biggs admitted to shooting one of the victims and pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including murder. He's currently awaiting sentencing and could still face life in prison despite his cooperation. Tartaglione's lawyers argued that their client was set up by his associates as a convenient fall guy, and that he wasn't involved in the murders. Unswayed by the defense's claims, though, a jury convicted him on all counts. And with the death penalty off the table, he faces a potential life sentence. 12. Miles Bryant. A young woman named Susana Morales vanished in July of 2022 while walking home from a friend's house in Gwinnett County, Georgia. According to authorities, Susana texted her mother at around 9:40 p.m. saying that she was on her way home. But she was never seen or heard from again, and her phone's location stopped pinging at around 10:30 p.m. Without revealing too many details, officials said that they believe Susanna died sometime between 10 p.m. that evening and 2 a.m. the following morning. A break in the case finally came in February 2023, when Susanna's remains were discovered in a remote wooded area roughly 20 miles or 32 kilometers from her last known whereabouts. DNA confirmed that the remains belonged to the missing young woman. Nearby, investigators found a gun belonging to a 22-year-old Doraville police officer named Miles Bryant, which he'd reported stolen on the day Susanna disappeared. Detectives began monitoring Bryant's activities, and it wasn't long before they reportedly found evidence directly linking him to the young woman's death. Shortly after the discovery of Susanna's body, authorities announced Bryant's arrest for the kidnapping and murder of the victim. According to charging documents, Bryant lived near the location where Susanna went missing. In a warrant, investigators noted that they suspected him of committing crimes against the victim, in addition to those he's been charged with. Fine print aside, authorities claim to know for certain that Bryant killed Susanna and dumped her slain body in the forest. During a hearing in May of 2023, prosecutors accused Bryant of abusing his badge and position of authority to commit felonies. Bryant's defense attorneys asked the judge to release him, pending the outcome of his case. But still, the prosecution managed to convince the court that the defendant was a danger to society. The judge denied bail, and Bryant remains behind bars while awaiting the next step in the disturbing case. 11. Monica JohnsonMarkor. In late 2023, a door-to-door pest control salesman was shot dead by a former sheriff's captain in Shelby County, Tennessee, for simply doing his job and trying to sell his company's services. According to reports, 51-year-old Monica JohnsonMarkor had recently spoken with her incarcerated son, who's serving a 20-year prison sentence for a horrific crime, and was under the impression that a gang had put out a hit on her and her father. When the salesman approached her door, JohnsonMarkor supposedly mistook him for a hitman and ran to hide in the attic, while alerting her father to the suspected presence of a killer. Someone inside the house opened fire on the salesman in broad daylight, thinking he had a gun in his hand when it was actually just an iPad. He was shot in the chest and was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. Police found a handgun in the crawl space where JohnsonMarkor said that she had hidden. She denied pulling the trigger, but she failed to convince investigators of her innocence. The salesman survived, and JohnsonMarkor faced one count of felony aggravated assault. She posted a $4,000 bond and remains free pending the outcome of the case. 10. Glenn Coleman. In a disturbing case of a law enforcement officer allegedly abusing his power that made news headlines in early 2023, a 61-year-old British cop named Glenn Coleman was accused of assaulting a drunk woman as she vomited uncontrollably at a police station in Cardiff, Wales. According to reports, the woman got sick after a night of bar hopping. Coleman allegedly accompanied her in a taxi to a place where she planned to stay the night, and one of the woman's friends claimed to have caught the crooked cop in the middle of the assault after bursting into the home without warning. Coleman's accuser told investigators that she would have never consented to the interaction, not only because of how sick she was, but because Coleman was old enough to be her grandfather. The former officer denied the allegations, claiming that the interaction was consensual. But he was charged in connection with the alleged crime, and the case went to trial. During the proceedings, the court was shown a video of the victim being interviewed. She was crying and was clearly upset as she described how she wanted the attack to stop, but wasn't strong enough to put an end to the unwelcome contact. The woman also accused Coleman of bruising her during the assault. Prosecutors pointed out just how sick the woman was before the attack. She was reportedly struggling to remain steady on her feet and threw up on a fellow bar patron before hailing a cab back to the address where she planned to crash. Coleman was then accused of getting into the taxi with the victim. The woman described how she couldn't stop puking after arriving at her accommodation, to the point where she was throwing up like it was water. She stood by her claim that she was far too drunk to consent to the things that were being done to her. The attack finally ended when the woman's friends arrived at the address and called the cops. Coleman allegedly claimed that he didn't think the victim was too drunk to consent, but her friends claimed it was obvious that she was in no condition to do anything other than rest off her booze-induced illness. She certainly wasn't in a position to give meaningful consent, according to witnesses. Coleman pleaded not guilty and stood by his claims of innocence. In the end, though, he was ultimately found not guilty of multiple crimes. However, he admitted that he was embarrassed and ashamed of the incident and the publicity it brought. 9. Patrick Heron. Between 2005 and 2022, former Philadelphia police officer Patrick Heron allegedly committed dozens of crimes against female victims, including assault, kidnapping, retaliation against witnesses, and harassment. The disgraced ex-cop, who retired in 2019, was charged with over 200 crimes when he was finally arrested in September 2022, and again in June of 2023. According to authorities, Heron committed most of the crimes during 2 separate stints for the Philadelphia Police Department, with the first lasting from 1995 to 2008 and the second from 2010 to 2019. He was accused of purposely targeting particularly vulnerable victims, who he felt were less likely to tell on him than someone in a non-vulnerable position, including young women who struggled with drug addiction, had unstable home lives, and had criminal histories. Heron allegedly assaulted his victims both on and off duty, including in the back of his police cruiser. If convicted as charged, Heron could have faced 1,300 years behind bars. He was slated to go to trial, but wisely chose to negotiate a plea deal instead. The prosecution was open to the idea of a plea deal because avoiding a trial meant sparing numerous victims from the trauma of recounting their experiences in a public courtroom. As a result, Heron pleaded guilty to dozens of crimes in exchange for a 15 to 40-year prison sentence. In addition to being safely behind bars, where he can no longer harm innocent victims, he will most certainly never work as a cop again. 8. David Hall Dixon. A trio of thieves were stealing tools from a condominium parking lot in Tacoma Park, Maryland, early one morning in 2021, when they were spotted by Pentagon police officer David Dixon as he left for work. The off-duty cop, who lived at the building, confronted the suspects by blocking their car with his vehicle. One of the alleged thieves, Michael Thomas, put his car in reverse and tried backing away from Dixon, who got out of his vehicle and approached the accused thieves with a flashlight and his gun in hand. As the suspects drove away, Dixon opened fire from behind their car and fatally shot James Johnson and Dominique Williams. In a frantic 911 call, Thomas could be heard saying that the police had just shot at him and his friends. He said that his friends were dead and that the shooter had targeted him as well. Thomas said that he was genuinely afraid for his life. Prosecutors charged Dixon with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. According to charging documents, the 42-year-old fired at the thieves at a time when they were trying to flee the scene and therefore didn't present an imminent threat. In other words, Dixon's conduct didn't represent a justified use of deadly force. Furthermore, Dixon didn't have the authority to act as a cop outside of his job, as argued by the prosecution, who accused the defendant of using his service weapon for personal reasons. Dixon's first trial ended in a hung jury, with an 11-1 deadlock in favor of convicting him of second-degree murder. Instead of going to trial for a second time, though, Dixon pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree assault. Under the terms of a plea agreement, he faces up to 30 years in prison at his upcoming sentencing in November 2023. 7. Jorge UA Rosa. In September 2023, the Sheriff's Office in Riverside County, California, announced the arrest of one of its own in connection with an ongoing investigation into a drug ring with alleged ties to a Mexican cartel. 25-year-old former deputy Jorge UA Rosa was reportedly caught with over 100 pounds, 45 kilograms of fentanyl in his car during a traffic stop. The ex-cop now stands accused of playing an integral role in the flow of narcotics into the country, and he faces 1 felony count each of possessing fentanyl for sale and transporting narcotics. According to authorities, the traffic stop came amid an investigation into UA Rosa's suspected activities. They were listening in on one of his phone calls and surveilling him in the lead-up to his arrest, which means they already had a pretty good idea that they would catch him with contraband when they enacted the traffic stop. UA Rosa was allegedly planning to travel to an identified narcotics stash location in Victorville on the day he was nabbed. He was seen entering a garage at the address right after he made a phone call to a relative. Investigators followed the crooked cop as he left the location, and when the time was right, they pulled him over. According to an affidavit, UA Rosa was in possession of packages containing more than 500,000 fentanyl pills and weighing 104 pounds, 47 kilograms. So, not surprisingly, he resigned from the Riverside County Sheriff's Office following his arrest. UA Rosa's colleagues don't believe he smuggled drugs while on duty or into the local jail, but they have said that they believe he knew his actions could have had deadly consequences. The affidavit furthermore pointed out that the defendant is all too aware of the deadliness of the ongoing opioid epidemic. Yet, he allegedly had enough drugs in his possession to cause 2 million overdoses. 6. Stephen Jones. 34-year-old father of 2, Stephen Jones, was working as a police sergeant in northern Wales when he began cheating on his wife, 37-year-old Madeline Jones, with a local barmaid in 1992. He completely lost interest in his marriage amid his excitement over the affair, but he didn't want to deal with the potential costs of a divorce. And he also believed that leaving his wife would jeopardize his chances of being promoted at work. So, late one night in early 1993, Jones lured Madeline into their garage by pretending that his brother was suffering from a heart attack. Using his police baton, he then killed his wife with a single blow to the head. And afterward, he put a garbage bag over Madeline's head to prevent blood from getting everywhere and loaded her body into his vehicle. Jones proceeded to speed down an embankment and into a tree, and placed Madeline's body in a nearby stream, hoping to pass her death off as the unfortunate result of a tragic accident. But a witness spotted the scene and called the police so quickly that Jones didn't have as much time as he needed to dispose of evidence before his colleagues began showing up at his house to comfort him. By then, investigators at the scene were already discovering suspicious signs that the crash had been staged. Jones, who stood over a foot taller than his wife, forgot to pull the seat forward before placing Madeline behind the wheel. She was far too short to have been driving the car with the seat set so far back. And even before an autopsy was performed, forensic detectives noticed that Madeline's head injuries were inconsistent with a car accident. There was also no glass in her hair, making it highly doubtful that she went through the windshield. In the trunk of Stephen's car, police found his police helmet, which he wore to prevent injury when he crashed Madeline's vehicle. They also found the bloody baton that he used to carry out the heinous crime. Jones had taken out multiple life insurance policies on his wife and stood to gain tens of thousands of dollars from her death. It may not sound like much today, but that was a substantial amount of money 30 years ago. But luckily, he was arrested and charged with Madeline's murder before he could cash in. Jones claimed that Madeline died after falling and hitting her head, He said that he panicked and staged the accident out of fear that he'd be blamed for her death. Prosecutors, on the other hand, accused Jones of carrying out a cold and calculated murder and using his police experience to his advantage in his attempt to cover it up. In the end, he was found guilty by a jury and was sentenced to life in prison. 5. Gina Meer. Corruption among the NYPD's ranks is nothing new, but sometimes it happens on a level that makes widespread news headlines. Such was the case for former NYPD cop Gina Meer, who stands accused of tipping off her gangster boyfriend about a federal investigation into his alleged crimes. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, 33-year-old Meer warned her Bronx-based beau, Andrew Caballo Dunn, that the feds were probing him in connection with a murder case. She also allegedly engaged in a racketeering conspiracy with Dunn and other members of the so-called Shooting Boys gang. She leaked confidential information to gang members, revealing the identity of a witness, and she even helped a gang member flee after committing a murder. More specifically, Meer allegedly helped Dunn flee following the September 2020 shooting of a rival gang member. In a statement, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams accused Meer of shamelessly exploiting her position of public trust for the sake of helping gang members within her precinct who terrorize the community by committing robberies, murders, drug trafficking, and other dangerous crimes. During her 9 years on the force, Meer reportedly racked up around 36 complaints regarding her conduct as a police officer. According to the New York Post, most of those complaints accused the disgraced cop of abusing her position of authority, although only 5 were substantiated. She was also named in at least a dozen lawsuits, which resulted in at least $765,000 worth of settlements. Her involvement with the Shooting Boys allegedly began in 2019. By then, the gang had been wreaking havoc on the area for at least 2 years. Federal authorities claim that Meer knew this, but did nothing to stop it and remained complicit in the gang's crimes. In fact, she allegedly maintained contact with Dunn using secret social media accounts and phone numbers, further suggesting that she was all too aware of what the gang was up to during that time. Following Dunn's shooting of a rival gang member in 2020, Meer participated in the manhunt while secretly maintaining contact with him. Dunn pleaded guilty to murder and other charges related to his gang activity and is currently serving a 35-year prison sentence. Meer faces 4 federal charges, including racketeering conspiracy, conspiracy to obstruct justice, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, and accessory after the fact to murder in aid of racketeering. If only convicted of the least serious charge, she could face 5 years in prison, but the most severe charges carry a maximum penalty of 20 years behind bars. 4. Aaron Dean. During the early morning hours one day in October 2019, a Fort Worth resident called the police and asked them to conduct a welfare check on the home of their neighbor, 28-year-old Tatiana Jefferson, after noticing that the young woman's front door was open. While walking through the backyard, Officer Aaron Dean noticed Tatiana through the window and yelled for her to put her hands up. But he didn't give her any time to comply with the order before firing a single shot in her direction. Tatiana was struck by the bullet, and unfortunately, she died at the scene. Investigators soon discovered that Dean had failed to identify himself as a police officer before ordering Tatiana to put her hands up. And while a gun was found near the young woman's body, it was never established whether Dean could see Tatiana holding the weapon before he pulled the trigger. A second responding officer said that she couldn't see the gun through the window and that she could only see Jefferson's face. Moreover, the firearm was legally owned, and Tatiana had a concealed carry permit. Without realizing that she was facing off with a cop, she had every right to be prepared to defend herself inside her own home. Jefferson's nephew told police that his aunt grabbed her gun out of her purse after hearing noise in the backyard, and that Jefferson was holding the gun at her side when she was shot. He further revealed that everything was fine inside the house. The family had burned some burgers they were cooking and had just opened the front door to air the place out. Dean resigned from the force 2 days after the shooting. Before he could be fired for violating the agency's policies on use of force, de-escalation, and unprofessional conduct, he was charged with murder and allegedly refused to cooperate with investigators. Police Union President Manny Ramirez described Dean's decision to use deadly force as dumbfounding and acknowledged that there was no reasonable explanation for it. The case spent 3 years working its way through the court system before Dean was found not guilty of murder. However, he was convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter in December 2022, and as a result, he was sentenced to nearly 12 years in prison. 3. James J. Keith Stewart. 60-year-old Terry Wayne Hinton was fatally struck by a vehicle while walking along a street in Colbert County, Alabama in October 2022. Tuscumbia Police Chief Tony Logan later revealed that as soon as the 911 call came in, he was informed that the accident appeared to involve an officer's vehicle. Hinton was pronounced dead at the scene. The alleged perpetrator, 34-year-old Tuscumbia police officer James J. Keith Stewart, was indicted on a reckless murder charge several months after the deadly accident. According to the indictment, he was allegedly under the influence of a controlled substance and was speeding and/or driving down the wrong side of the road at the time of the crash. Stewart was set to go to trial in late October 2023, but the proceedings were postponed until early 2024, so the outcome of the case remains to be seen. 2. Demetrius Ortega. An innocent Ohio woman's life was cut short in April 2022 when she was fatally struck by a drunk driver. 30-year-old Naimo Abdirahman was crossing the street on foot when the deadly accident occurred, and unfortunately, she died at the scene. The person who hit Abdirahman fled the scene and was later identified as off-duty Columbus police officer Demetrius Ortega. He was charged with failure to stop after an accident and operating a vehicle under the influence of alcohol. Ortega eventually pleaded guilty to the charges, and as you've probably already figured out, he's no longer a cop. The 51-year-old was sentenced to 18 months behind bars, and his driver's license was suspended for 3 years. He'll also be under supervision for up to 2 years following his release from prison. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Donald Carlile. In 2021, just a year after leaving the police force in Oakland City, Indiana, former officer Donald Carlile was charged with the attempted murder of a woman he got into a fight with during a party. The 31-year-old was accused of threatening and firing shots at the victim's car, who survived with injuries after being hit with debris. Her vehicle was damaged, but she continued driving until she reached safety and then dialed 911. As part of a deal with prosecutors, Carlile pleaded guilty to criminal recklessness with a deadly weapon while shooting a firearm into a place where people are likely to gather. And in exchange for his guilty plea, the attempted murder charge and other related counts were dropped. Carlile was sentenced to 6 years in prison, with the option to petition the court to modify the sentence after 5 years. He was also given credit for the 235 days he'd spent behind bars prior to his sentencing. Carlile's reasons for leaving the police force remain unclear, but it's likely safe to assume, based on his alleged behavior following his departure, that his police career wouldn't have lasted much longer anyway.
Number 10. Joseph McCullen. A part-time police officer in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania, found himself on the wrong side of the law. Fellow officers accused Joseph McCullen of stealing marijuana from a police evidence room. His boss has now suspended McCullen without pay from his job at the Dalton Police Department. According to court documents, in an interview, the officer admitted to a past drug problem, saying too much work had caught up with him, and the marijuana helped him chill out. Prosecutors have charged the 34-year-old man with theft and tampering with evidence, among other charges. It's heartbreaking because you see, again, a police officer that makes a mistake that shows other police officers in a bad light. Deputy District Attorney Shane Scanlon said. Investigators believe he might have gone into the Dalton police evidence room twice in about a week late last November. Detectives think he used his clothes to cover a camera that films the evidence room for about 9 minutes during the first incident. The second time, the camera captured him going into the room, coming out, and putting something he had removed in his pocket. "I'm amazed. I'm surprised. I really am," Jeff Klinkle of Dalton said. News of the man's arrest has spread swiftly in this usually otherwise quiet town. "I think he's a good guy, but what can I say? He should have not done that, obviously," Klinkle added. Members of the community say the arrest shows the problem of the addictive nature of drugs. They hope a powerful message is sent to other officers if the allegations turn out to be true. Investigators found out marijuana was stolen from the 2 pending cases by weighing the pot. Detectives reported McCullen admitted to stealing the pot in interviews. "You can take it for what it's worth. Signs of desperation, or just really someone who was not thinking clearly," Scanlon said. The Dalton Police Department employed McCullen for the last year and a half. He is currently free on unsecured bail. Number 9. Michael Baker. In 2012, a photo of a young man siphoning gasoline from a police car in Jenkins County, Kentucky, while flipping the middle finger at the camera, went viral on Facebook. He was identified as a 20-year-old coal miner named Michael Baker, and his bold behavior soon caught up with him. Someone passed the photo on to the local police, who charged Baker with theft by unlawful taking. In an interview with local station WYMT, he insisted it was a staged photo and a prank, a misunderstanding. Baker said that he and his girlfriend, Joanne Sandlin, were bored and thought it would be funny to take a picture and post it on social media. Sandlin also told WYMT that the photo was a prank, adding that she wouldn't have posted it online if she and Baker had any actual plans to siphon gas from a police cruiser. The authorities failed to see the humor. In the words of Jenkins Police Chief Alan Borms, "If they're going to do it to a police car, they're going to do it to just about anybody." And the incident may have been more than a harmless joke after all. Baker reportedly admitted to getting a small amount of gasoline out of the squad car's tank because there wasn't much fuel in it to begin with. Shortly after the incident, Chief Borm said that the department was considering putting locking caps on the gas tanks of the police cars to prevent any more fuel from being stolen. So maybe this started out as a prank, but it just got out of hand. Number 8. Tosha Sponsler. One day in 2017, police in Lufkin, Texas were called to a retail store to investigate a recent theft. The suspect, 33-year-old Tosha Sponsler, ran from the scene. Officers soon caught up to her and arrested her for evading arrest on foot. They handcuffed the woman and put her in the back of a patrol car. Sponsler slipped one of her hands free from the cuffs at some point. As soon as she had the opportunity, she got into the driver's seat and took off in the police car. She barreled straight towards an officer parked in the center turn lane, and they only narrowly avoided a crash thanks to his quick maneuvering. A 25-minute chase ensued, ending with Sponsler back in handcuffs and police custody. She now faced much more severe charges, including evading arrest in a vehicle while using a deadly weapon, aggravated assault on a public servant with a deadly weapon, and more. A jury convicted Sponsler of all charges and sentenced her to 45 years behind bars. She appealed the ruling, claiming that there was insufficient evidence to find her guilty on some charges, but her conviction was upheld, and she now has more time to reflect on her actions from behind bars. Number 7. Jennifer Stewart. Police in Nashville, Texas arrested 31-year-old Jennifer Stewart in 2019 after responding to a call about a car break-in at a local car wash. Stewart was accused of committing the break-in and beating the vehicle's owner. Officers put her in the back of a squad car and told her to wait while they sorted the situation out. While they spoke with the victim, Stewart got behind the wheel and sped off. Surveillance footage revealed the woman had wriggled past the divider and crawled from the back seat into the front. At least a dozen vehicles embarked on a high-speed chase. They disabled the stolen car using spike strips. Stewart was charged with burglary of a motor vehicle, evading arrest, vehicle theft, and vandalism. Much more serious crimes that she would have faced if she had cooperated with the police. In addition, the arrest report failed to explain a motive. In the aftermath of the bizarre ordeal, the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department announced that an investigation was underway to determine how Stewart stole a car in the presence of officers. Number 6. Angie Frost. In March 2018, a woman named Angie Frost was pulled over by Tulsa police on suspicion of driving a stolen vehicle. She insisted a friend named Steven had loaned her his car because she was moving, and that she did not know it had been reported stolen. Dashcam and body cam footage later revealed that Frost became tearful during the conversation, saying that she was facing years in prison if she got in trouble. But the 3 officers at the scene remained suspicious. One of them handcuffed Angie with her hands behind her back and had her sit in the passenger seat of his patrol car while he dealt with the situation at hand. At some point, police realized that Angie's friend Stephen had taken the vehicle from his mother without her permission. He told his mom that Miss Frost had then stolen the car from him. When the officers weren't looking, she got her cuffed hands in front of her body. Then, she crawled into the driver's seat and took off. It was a short chase. Police followed the woman to a hotel, where she got out of the vehicle and ran. She didn't get very far before the police had her back in custody. Frost made headlines again in 2020 when she was accused of killing 51-year-old Stephen Wood inside his Tulsa home. She claimed that the man had groped her and that she hit him with a table lamp to get him off her before another person came into the apartment and strangled Wood to death. But the authorities didn't buy her story and charged her with first-degree murder and 2 counts of possession of a stolen car for fleeing the scene in the victim's truck. Number 5. Joshua Swut. After being arrested on suspicion of a car theft last year, a 23-year-old man named Joshua Swut escaped custody while being transferred to a detention facility. During the drive to jail, the officer transporting Swut pulled over to assist with a serious motorcycle accident. Unfortunately, he left the suspect sitting in the front passenger seat. While the officer focused on the crash, Swut slid behind the wheel and took off in the police cruiser. A 30-mile chase ensued, with the suspect hitting speeds of up to 100 miles an hour, despite having his hands cuffed behind his back. Even more shockingly, the pursuit didn't end until the car Swut was driving ran out of gas, at which point he pulled over and fled on foot. Police soon caught up with him and took him back to jail. Only this time, he faced much more severe charges than he initially gotten in trouble for. Kansas Highway Patrol spokesperson Trooper Todd Hallman told ABC News that he assumed Swut drove using his knees, and while it's never okay to commit the crimes that the young man is accused of, that he emerged from the chase uninjured and without crashing the car is impressive, especially since it involved driving along narrow stretches of highway with a ditch on either side. Number 4. Chaos in Colorado Springs. Police in Colorado Springs recently went to an apartment complex in response to a reported assault with a knife. Witnesses told officers that the suspect had threatened someone with a knife while demanding a ride from the person, and that they escaped. But the suspect allegedly came back to the apartment and killed someone, then assaulted a responding officer, causing another policeman to shoot at him. It's unclear whether the bullet struck the man who took off in a stolen police cruiser. The chase ended when the thief crashed the cop car into several vehicles. He was taken into custody and is accused of homicide, attempted carjacking, and assault. The suspect's name is being withheld as the El Paso County Sheriff's Office takes over the investigation, and the authorities are remaining tight-lipped about the case for now. The I-25 highway was shut down for hours because of the high-speed pursuit and the multiple crashes because of the suspect's recklessness. Officials have not revealed whether any motorists were hurt in the collisions. Number 3. Lorenzo Leon Taylor. Officers recently received a call about a domestic disturbance inside a vehicle along an interstate in Brandon, Missouri. They learned from the tipster that the suspect had walked away from the scene. When they caught up with Lorenzo Leon Taylor, it quickly became apparent that he would not cooperate, according to a police statement. The man was carrying what looked like a bag, and it seemed to officers like he was trying to get something out of it. When he was asked what he was digging for, Taylor allegedly responded by saying, "I have the same thing you do," sparking concerns that he might have a gun. An officer tried to take the bag, and a struggle ensued, during which the suspect attempted to steal the cop's firearm. He shoved the policeman to the ground, got into a SWAT car, and drove off, knocking the officer into oncoming traffic. Thankfully, the officer only suffered minor injuries. The officer fired a bullet into the driver's side window, striking Taylor's hand, but it didn't stop him from speeding away. Police stopped the vehicle a few minutes later after a chase involving multiple law enforcement agencies. EMTs treated Taylor's injury at the scene, and he was taken into custody. He reportedly continued to act uncooperative and kicked out the windows of a transport vehicle while being driven to the Rankin County Jail. Police say that Taylor has an extensive criminal record and was wearing an ankle monitor relating to prior offenses in Mississippi at the time of his arrest. Number 2. FBI seeks police property thief. Someone recently broke into a police and fire uniform supplier in Weymouth, Massachusetts, in the middle of the night and stole Boston police uniforms. An employee discovered evidence of the break-in the following day and contacted law enforcement, who determined that the thief or group of thieves had made off with 4 uniforms. Several of the store's drawers had been rummaged through, and the intruders had left behind a bag filled with flashlights, handcuffs, mace, riot-style helmets, and other police equipment. Weymouth Police Lieutenant Thomas Farrell told Boston 25 News that 4 Boston police dress coats and 4 pairs of pants were missing, and a leather jacket. The thieves also took a lightweight jacket, a short-sleeved shirt similar to what bike patrol officers wear, and a bullet-resistant vest. Farrell admitted detectives were uncertain of why someone stole the uniforms, but the detectives were primarily concerned with the Boston Marathon just weeks away. He also pointed out that there may be no connection between the uniform theft and the marathon, and that someone may have planned to use the stolen property for unrelated, albeit criminal, reasons. Thankfully, the marathon began with no significant problems. The FBI is assisting the Weymouth police in the investigation and has offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the suspect's arrest. For some, the case has brought up memories from the case in 1990 that remains unsolved to this day. In what may be the most sophisticated heist in the region's history, a group of thieves dressed as Boston police stole $1 million worth of valuable artwork from the Gardner Museum. The paintings were never recovered, and the criminals remain at large over 30 years later. Number 1. Aaron Higgins. An officer who works for the New Albany Police Department in Indiana was recently about to leave his house and drive to work. He discovered that his patrol vehicle was missing from his driveway. The marked car had been stolen in the early morning hours with an AR-15 and a .308 caliber rifle inside, along with a tactical vest and several other pieces of equipment. Officers located the Dodge Charger in a neighboring county later that day. A SWAT team later found and captured the suspect, who was identified as 27-year-old Aaron Higgins in nearby Marengo, Indiana. He was booked into the Harrison County Jail on a vehicle theft charge and may face other charges. The Harrison County Sheriff's Office has taken over the case and is attempting to determine how the car was stolen. In a statement, New Albany Police Department Chief Todd Bailey thanked the many law enforcement agencies that helped recover the stolen vehicle and apprehend the suspect. He reassures local residents that the public safety and trust are the agency's top priorities. The department plans to review its procedures to prevent something like this from happening again.
Would you rather live in a town with a corrupt police force or no law enforcement agency, period? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.